Right, sorry, the sound is not on. I've done it again. Right, I'm now going to get 10 to 15 seconds of people saying there's no sound. I'm going to carry on because you'll get the sound any moment. So, sorry about that. Good evening. I've done it again, but the microphone is now fine. There's been several questions that people have posted in advance, as is quite usual. I've clipped some of them because some of them are really quite good. I was going to start with a particular topic today, and then, and this is really weird, Matthew posted something to ask, which I thought was really good. I'm going to modify it a little bit, and now he's retracted it. But it was a really good question, and it might well be something we can do to get ourselves started before we go on a tangent. So the question was, I don't know the exact wording because he's deleted it now, but the question was, why are Red Wall Tories, you think to the likes of Scott Benton, for example, Jonathan Gullis, Lee Anderson, why do they seem more right-wing than the more normal Conservatives? Now, I am going to modify the question a little bit, because if you modify it a little bit, it is something I've thought of myself. Now, I am going to say I don't think they're more right-wing. I think they come across as more authoritarian. So, just now I've potentially got loads of bloody images. No, I don't want to get rid of that one. Okay, I want to put that one on. But I wanted to get rid of the other one as well. I've got too many images. There it is. And I haven't labelled them properly. So, the political compass, we've done this before. Where's my thingy cam? There we go. Right, so, again, just to highlight this, so you've got left and right wing, remember. We associate people, say, on the left wing as also being in favour of certain rights, freedoms. And we associate people on the right wing as being a bit more authoritarian, lock them up, throw away the key types, anti-immigration, all that sort of stuff. But in reality, they're not really anything to do with each other. Right and left is purely about economics. Left wing is about a belief that the state should control at least certain public services. If you're on the extreme left, you're a communist, you believe the state should control all means of production. There's no private enterprise at all. The right wing tends to believe that the state has a role in providing services, but it should have a minimal role. It's small state. It should do as little as possible. Essentially, it's just there to marshal the private sector. But if you are on the extreme right wing, you're free market capitalist, then you really don't believe that the state should be running very much at all. Maybe the police and the armed forces, that's it. So that's left and right. So when you're talking about things like being anti-immigration or anti-human rights or pro these things, that's not left and right, that's up and down, really. That's liberal or authoritarian. And what you find is there are a lot of traditional Conservatives that are right-wing, that is, economically they're about the small state, but they can also be fairly liberal. Now, and the attitudes can change. It doesn't have to be consistent. So they may, for example, be anti-immigration. There's a lot of anti-immigration about the Conservative Party, or at least in terms of their rhetoric. They never actually reduce immigration, funnily enough, because they really know it's a nonsense. But in terms of the rhetoric, and they may also want harsh treatment of criminals, but they're also against criminalising certain things. You could easily find people on the right wing, lots of people on the right wing, who, for example, want to decriminalise certain drugs, recreational drugs. They are all about freedom of speech, sometimes to the point where they don't even accept that there should be any responsibility attached to it. Whereas what we've got with the likes of Jonathan Gullis and Lee Anderson and Scott Benton and a few others as well. I don't know that if you looked at all of the Red Wall Tories, they're all like this, but what you do definitely see is a strain of being quite on the authoritarian scale, like the the anti-young hooligans, the anti-drugs, the anti-immigration, basically the grumpy grandpa policies. And I think if there is a trend towards that, I think it could be explained by the fact these people, remember, were in places that are Labour areas. That's why it was called the Red Wall. They were Labour areas, Labour heartlands. People like this were never getting elected. So if you're going to, and if I flip it on its head a little bit, my experience, for example, of Labour constituencies in solid Tory areas, they tend to be the more extremist. So if you're in an area where your party does quite well, it doesn't always have to win, but it has a decent chance, then you're likely to get a much more diverse group of party members being involved in things, being involved in the local party activities. Whereas if you've got no chance, if you're in an area, for example, I've seen it with Labour, when you're in an area where Labour have got no chance at all, then the more moderate people tend not to go along, because you've got better things to do with your time than knocking on doors and being told to piss off, because they're not going to vote Labour. You might get the odd one, hey, I found a Labour voter, but you're going to lose the election, you've no chance. And so the only people that get involved are the ones who tends to be, not all of them, but there tends to be a higher proportion of the more extremists, the ones who really just want to sound off their own political ideas. They just want a captive audience to express their own political ideas, so they go along to the local party, and you get this sort of extreme bubble. That's what will have happened to the Conservatives in these Red Wall areas. You've got these people. I know Lee Anderson wasn't a Tory for very long. He was a Labour councillor till he was about to get kicked out. But then, the likes of Jonathan Gullis and so on, they'll have been part of a group, and Lee Anderson will have been part of a group, because remember, some people decided he should be their candidate, and it won't have been moderate Tories getting involved, because the Tories just lose every time. You've got better things to do with your time than get your arse kicked every election. It's hard work for these activists, going knocking on doors, going to the meetings, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's quite dispiriting if you're in an area where you've got no chance as well. It's really not very good for your motivation. So you tend to get the more extremists, and so what will have happened is they will have been promoting as their candidates the king of the extremists in their areas, and then what happened is, because of a weird alignment of the stars, all of a sudden they were winning these seats. I mean, they won't do next time, but for 2019 they won them. And I think if there are Red Wall Tories, if you were to go down them all, and I haven't done this exercise, just because there's a few prominent ones doesn't mean like it's the case everywhere. But if you were to go down this and you were to start to see that maybe some of them tend to be a bit more extreme in their views, not so much right-wing, but authoritarian, shall we say, then I think that's probably what the reason is. I think that is probably what would cause it. The fact that these people, they won't have gone through the normal vetting process, really. They've just been picked. They were in another election, they'd just be paper candidates. It's like, pick who you want, because we're not going to win. It's just in 2019 they won. What's up with politics, Joe? Poking fun at Starmer's background. I don't really know. I haven't seen it. I've seen reference to it. I haven't actually seen it. At the end of the day, if people want to poke fun, they can poke fun. It's not like the worst thing ever, is it? I have more of an issue when people just like tell lies. I don't. But in fact, we'll bring this one in. We had a question towards the start from Peter saying, before he became Labour leader, was there a sign of Keir's willingness to be ruthless? Perhaps from people who knew him closely. See, for me, before Keir Starmer became an MP, who was Keir Starmer to me? He was someone who, when I was a young lad, was editing a Trotskyite journal, really, but a far left journal. Used to interview people like Tony Benn and Michael Foot and so on. So he was today we would say he was on the hard left. And then he became a lawyer, and we know he represented the miners. We know he represented some people for free. We know he worked with Amnesty International, helping to help people escape the death penalty around the world. And we know he became Director of Public Prosecutions. People who will know him may well have known he was quite single-minded and ruthless, but for the public, he didn't really have much of a profile. Maybe that's what's helped in a way. Because what you know is, we've got two of the main if you look in Westminster, if you look at all the political leaders in Westminster, you've got Rishi Sunak, right? He's younger than I am. He only joined Parliament in 2015, not got much experience. And it's not like he was a politician before that. It's not like he was like a councillor for years or whatever. He wasn't active in politics at all. He just entered Parliament 2015. That's it. That's his experience. So not really a politician. Keir Starmer, same sort of thing. Now he did dip in and out of politics. He got involved in politics when he was young, obviously. So he wasn't quite as green as Rishi Sunak. But nonetheless, he'd just been the Director of Public Prosecutions. So he hadn't been like a Labour councillor for years before he became an MP, or like a trade union representative or anything. He just entered politics, entered Parliament. Stephen Flynn for the SNP. He's very young. So he can only have, I don't know exactly his background, but it can only be quite limited. So you've got the main leaders in Westminster that in many ways, although they're in politics, are not necessarily what you would call career politicians. So you wonder, because it's like that for all of these parties, none of them went for very experienced politicians. Is there at the moment an attitude? Do the parties see that there's an attitude where the public their trust for politicians is so low that actually having what is, to all intents and purposes, outsiders in charge, a better look? Uncle Social, they're saying, after listening to Michael Gove's recent interviews about government housing policy failures, is this another nail in Sunak's coffin ahead of the next general election? Do you know what? There's an awful lot of nails going into Sunak's coffin, I think. If I put... I've got so many things here. Hang on. Let us get rid of that. There are so many things like the Scott Benton thing. I'm going to find this picture again. Pain in the neck. Right, where is it? There it is. The Scott Benton thing. So this is quite serious to Sunak. Now you may think to yourself, well, he's withdrawn the whip really quickly. The Standards Committee will obviously get involved. He's not going to be a Tory candidate for the next election. You'd think Sunak's dealt with it. If this was a one-off, I would say, yeah, at the end of the day, of course, any party can end up with an MP like this. As soon as it comes out, if you deal with it, you cannot fault the party leader, you cannot fault the party. But this is just the latest. This is just the latest. This is starting to look like a pattern now. Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, made a big show of this integrity thing, right? Now, it's not going very well. How many Tory MPs has Sunak... I should have done a tally. I didn't realise I'd need to do a tally. Sunak has withdrawn the whip from quite a lot of Tory MPs. MPs of various parties do have the whip withdrawn now and then. They do get into trouble. MPs disproportionately are bell ends in all parties. You always get a few that are a bit full of themselves and they act like the rules don't apply to them. It's not the Tories that have got a monopoly on this. But he's had to withdraw the whip from so many MPs or sack them from his cabinet. How many of his own MPs has he had to discipline in his 6 and a bit months of being Prime Minister? And there's a pattern emerging here that he needs to deal with, because if journalists keep thinking that they can sting these MPs, it's just going to make it look worse. Sunak now has a challenge. He's now got to show not just that he's dealt with this one case, but that he's dealt with what is obviously a rot in his party. And I don't think he's going to try and do that. which means he's going to be vulnerable. If this happens again, this could be, I mean, this in itself is quite serious, because like I said in the video I did on it, it doesn't just show that Scott Benton is corrupt, it shows the Tory government is. Because Benton, when he was going through how he would corruptly use his position as an MP on that video, everything relied on ministers, because he's a backbencher, right? He can't really do very much at all. He was selling his ability to influence a minister. So the suggestion is that he is able to influence that minister, and it doesn't matter who the minister is, that he will have that level of influence, which speaks of a wider rot. But anyway, the Tory MP was from Blackpool, yes, and from what I understand, it's a very poor area. It is a very poor area. I mean, the thing is, he wasn't going to be their candidate anyway. So before this came out, Scott Benton was not reselected as their candidate. And there was I don't know exactly what happened, but they've chosen a different candidate anyway before this came out. It's not a safe seat. It's a seat that the Conservatives are definitely going to lose at the next election. And they only just won it last time. A few thousand votes, that was it. But there was a suggestion that he was trying to get himself a safer seat, because there's a list for MPs who have been displaced due to boundary changes, to allow them to try and fight, if they don't get nominated for the sort of amalgamated seat, that they can try and get a seat somewhere else. And so Suella Braverman, for example, keep saying Braverman, she, for example, has won, which is quite a surprise to me, because all the people in the know in the Tory party seemed to think she was going to lose to her rival, but she didn't. She's won it, and she won it quite comfortably, really. But if she hadn't won it, she would have been on that list as, okay, so we'll give you a crack at another in your area and so on. So Scott Benton was hoping for a safe seat, basically, even though the boundary changes hadn't affected his constituency. It was a bit of a fiddle. But now it's safe to say he's not going to get a seat at all, because he's not going to have the whip restored. It's all on video. There's absolutely no justification for restoring the whip. There will be a standards committee investigation into it. He will be suspended. He might well be suspended for long enough that it triggers a recall. Now, these investigations take a very long time. It might make no practical difference. It may well be that the standards committee doesn't even complete before the next election anyway. Because the next election, I just think, if you're going to have to put money on it, I would, and for a while I've said May, and the thing is, every month that goes past, I just think next May is more likely. I just think it's much more likely, but not certain. But I think, he's not standing in the next election. He's not going to get a seat. He can try and stand as an independent if he wants. That would be a good laugh. Oh, this is going back to Stammer, who's a prodigy of Ed Fitzgerald in the death row case in the West Indies, did way more than just the odd pro bono case. Yeah, well, indeed, but what I mean is that is, and this is why I say when people who particularly consider themselves pretty firm socialists attack Starmer over his socialist credential, I don't think there's an MP in Parliament that's got any, even in his league, in terms of socialist credentials, in terms of what he's actually done with his life. Which is not hard, because most career politicians have done very little. If you end up becoming a minister, then of course you put in place legislation, policies and so on that make a real difference. If you're a backbench MP all your life, you don't really do anything. But anyway, I mean, that is where it is. There are some people who will accuse Starmer of being a Red Tory, and you'll try and say to them, look at what he's done before he became an MP. You name me anyone at all that you revere that has done even as much as that, let alone more. They can't, but you know, it's a pointless argument. Tushan there saying, I think it's just the circumstances. The parties in each case decided there was no more suitable candidate. Sunak got where he is because Johnson wanted to appoint a yes man as Chancellor. Well, you say that, but, and I'm sure Sunak was, you know, very supportive of Johnson. But Johnson recently, okay, I know you can take anything he says just like Dominic Cummings with a pinch of salt, but sometimes it rings true. And Boris Johnson recounted relatively recently about his hesitation in of promoting Sunak. Because remember, Sunak didn't rise through the ranks. He was made, he'd never had a cabinet position before. He was just made Chancellor out of the blue. And Boris Johnson was saying he was a bit unsure because he wanted to surround himself with old tired lions, you know, like Nadine Norris, ones who wouldn't challenge him. I mean, we all knew that. You know, we knew that his cabinet was made up of people who wouldn't challenge him. And he says he wasn't sure about Sunak because he was a hungry lion. And again, we don't know just because he said that after the fact that it's true, but it does ring true, doesn't it? So, you know, there may have been some hesitation there. And I'm sure Sunak, you know, gave every impression of being very supportive of Boris Johnson and being, you know, the man to fight his corner. But Johnson probably should have gone with his gut from his point of view. Would you now say that the years of cuts since 2010 are now coming home to roost? You might not see the effects of all cuts immediately, but now we're seeing wider effects because of policy set in 2010. Absolutely. It's because nothing works, and people can see it because it's so. The thing is, it's not just the cuts either. It's not just the cuts. They also deliberately made the services run very inefficiently. So, for example, the NHS, they had them working against each other. It's not just that they don't have the funding. They have, because with the NHS, the Tories absolutely want healthcare to be fully privatised. So they have deliberately, with certain spending, they cut back just because they want to cut back expenditure, and they think that will allow them to reduce taxes, because it's all about taxes at the end of the day for them. But the NHS is a different beast. They actually want to destroy it. They actively want to destroy it. They've privatised almost everything else. There's very little left now. In terms of state-controlled public services, there's very little left. You know, we basically do just have what the far right would want, which is a police force and an armed forces. There's really not a lot. Even the NHS, before 2019 or before the pandemic hit, I think I saw someone, it's very difficult, you can't just quickly get the figures off the ONS because the government hide a lot of it, but someone had done an analysis which suggested that about 26% of what the government claims is the NHS's budget is actually private expenditure. And that doesn't, you know, that is just money that's put into the NHS, but that the NHS have to then basically just funnel to private providers, whether it be a private cleaning company or whether it be a private clinic or whatever it happens to be. Now it will have gone up. I just don't know how much. I mean, it might be a third or more of the NHS that is effectively privatised. You know, there's really not a great deal left. The people can see the public services are not working. You know, I mean, I was listening to Keir Starmer today because he was visiting Scunthorpe, so it's my local area. So I was invited along. I went along and listened to him, and he actually said almost nothing works. And I'm thinking to myself, what is there that does work? Maybe he just means the armed forces. I mean, even that. I mean, that's been crap for quite a long time. But I suppose it's all right. They haven't like fatally destroyed it to the point where people would notice, I suppose. But in terms of basic public services, what is there that you wouldn't notice is much worse. You know, education system, you can see how every facet of it is much worse. Healthcare, much worse. Social care, much worse. Housing, much worse. Roads. I mean, even the Tories are going around, oh, potholes, that's terrible, isn't it? Well, who's been in charge of the pissing roads? You know, and I know you can say councils, but who's the one, who gives councils the money? They raise some from council tax, the rest comes from the government. But the central government have been cutting council expenditure. So a larger proportion of council budgets have had to come from council tax. And nothing works. The justice system is broken. Our internet, we can't even say the Foreign Office is at least doing its work, because that's, you know, our international reputation's knackered. Everything's knackered. What's that? Willing to have another debate with Big Madge? He's up for it. What's that about? Yeah, Swella Braverman, sorry, I'm going to have to learn the new pronunciation. It's the problem when you only ever see something written for a long time, then someone says, oh, you got that wrong. Sometimes I don't really bother. Like when I say Putin, someone says, oh no, it's Putin. I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure it is, because I've seen people say Putin. If Vladimir Putin or Putin wants to get in touch with me and say, Phil, mate, you're getting my name wrong, fine. But generally speaking, I just go, look, I don't care. But, you know, I don't like to offend. But I've been saying Braverman for so long because I'll try. Took me ages to learn Maros Shevchovich. And I'm still probably getting that slightly wrong. Mark Spencer, Islamophobia swept under the carpet today. Yeah, I saw that. Again, you know, so a lot of this stuff, there's so much. A lot of it is it's not going to go away until the Tories are gone. And even then, I mean, I'm not going to hold Labour on a pedestal. There'll be things go wrong there for the same reasons as well. But, you know, it's at least... Why am I drinking Quinkink? I'm drinking lemonade. Pink lemonade. It is in a blue glass. Who was Sunak's kingmaker? Oh no, there was. I mean, there was a groundswell of opinion amongst MPs that he was their best bet, really. So I don't know that he had one very influential backer. I think it was just a lot of MPs. Because basically, if you think about it, Boris Johnson created a culture whereby the cream couldn't rise to the top in his government. So that's why when we say the Tory, well, most of the parties don't really have many leaders, which is always... But if you think about the way MPs are selected by their local parties, they don't... Leadership doesn't tend to feature amongst the prime requisites. So, you know, they don't have many leaders. But if you looked at it, like, it was Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, really. Penny Mordaunt gave a real good fist of it. She came really close. That was a bit of a surprise. But there is no one. So Rishi Sunak was just seeing the best of a bad job, I think. He will have inevitably some genuine supporters, but I think he's just seen as the best of a bad job. Thanks as always. Love the 30p Lee parable. Well, I had to go a little bit off piece this week, although I did quite like that one. And that is because, as I might have mentioned, I'm going away tomorrow. So I either had to reduce my schedule, which I haven't had to do in the end, or just get a load of videos. In fact, this is it. These are the next 3 days, all done, all uploaded. This has never happened before. This is a world first. This has never been done. 6 videos all lined up. Don't get your hopes up too much, because I couldn't do them all as I normally would, because of course news could break over the weekend. So I wasn't able to do videos on anything where some news may change, because then the video's knackered. So it was not straightforward. You think Big Madge would like to challenge me on Starmer in the current front bench in spite of the sharpening arguments on the left before the next election? Would he? Can do it on his channel then, because I don't think when people, it's not that interesting. If he wants me to do it on his channel, that's fine. I don't think I would do it on mine. Let's have a look. Quick question. Macron von der Leyen meetings. Yeah, I saw that one. With the big table with the load of earth in the middle of it. Do I think that the UK's NATO status is affected in general? No. Totally different situation. Again, it's completely different set of circumstances. The UK remains, along with France, the major military power in Europe. I mean, the real military power in Europe is America, of course. Whenever America buggers off, we're knackered. It's utterly ridiculous, I think, that Europe, I mean, all these very, very wealthy nations, and we've got a pretty good deal now in terms of, I know there was a worry about having lots of military nations in Europe in the past, because we used to keep using those military powers to have wars with each other. It was always a big problem. And indeed it caused 2 world wars. But the EU is a really good peace project. I think we can afford a lot of the major powers of Europe to. It seems a madness to me that Europe as a continent does not have the combined military to defend ourselves, that we're utterly reliant on the US. That is, I mean, the US, I mean, the only thing, I think pretty much the only thing Trump ever said that I would agree with is that, that Europe relies too much on America. We bloody do. And when you've got nutters like Trump in charge, it surely brings it into sharp focus. Imagine what would have happened with Ukraine if Donald Trump was the president. Can you consider it at all? But yeah, it's the Americans have privatized their armed forces to a great extent. They've privatized everything. I think even their police are privatized to some extent. It is good for us on the left to scrutinize our own arguments. I love scrutinizing my own arguments, but it is a deeply dull subject for my channel. Could Sunak have been imposed on Johnson by the party donors? Seem to be fast-tracked. Oh, I see what you mean in terms of when he was made. I thought you meant when he was made leader. So you mean when he was made chancellor? It's possible. I don't really know very much about Sunak's connections beforehand. Obviously, very wealthy, and married to, I mean, father-in-law, one of the richest billionaires in India. It's possible, I suppose. It is possible. Who knows? I mean, bear in mind, Boris Johnson on the say-so of a donor. I mean, that's what started his thing. He dissolved the Standards Committee to get Owen Paterson off. That's what started the rot, wasn't it? He had a dinner with, came back from COP26 early, had a dinner with a Tory party donor who was a mate of Owen Paterson, says, "Get him off, will you?" For which Boris went, "Oh, not a lot I can do about it. Come on, you're the Prime Minister, get him off." Well, I suppose I could destroy the Standards Committee, but that's a bit extreme. No, do that. And that's, of course, what started his fall from grace. Would the Tories have gotten away with austerity without Brexit? I think it's the other way around. Would they have gotten away with Brexit without austerity? Without austerity, the Brexit vote was so close. Any little change in that campaign would have shifted it the other way. Obviously, the likes of Nigel Farage would never have stopped bleating, "Oh, you only won by 52%. That's nothing. It wasn't even 52%. It's only like 26% of the population. That's nothing. We're going to keep trying." Yeah, fine. Nice one, Nigel. But with what swung it for a significant number of people was the fact that their lives had been made worse by austerity, and Brexiteers were saying, if we leave the EU, we save all this money. We can get, that powerful line, 350 million quid a week extra for the NHS. Now, if the NHS was working as it was 6 years before, then that wouldn't have been as powerful a draw, would it? So you think about a lot of the anti-immigration thing still would have worked, but that didn't do it for everyone. A lot of the rest of it was as a result of those public cuts. So it's like austerity created the conditions that allowed Brexit to happen. So And then Brexit, they've gotten away with... So they got away with austerity because they blamed it on Labour. Then they're getting away with Brexit because they blame... Well, they get it to an extent. Getting away with it because they're blaming it on COVID and the war in Ukraine. And then they'll get away with it the next phase. Don't you worry. Because you'll think to yourself, well, eventually they'll run out of things to blame it on. Oh, no, they won't. Because in a year's time, Labour are in power. They'll blame everything on Labour then. The Brexiteers are never getting caught on this one. Not until a generation or two has passed and people look back with sort of clearer eyes, as historians always do. I don't want Putin's way of explaining my errors. I don't care about him. I don't go out, you see, so leaving some like nerve agent on a park bench ain't going to work on me. And as for putting polonium in my tea, I don't drink tea. So I don't care what Putin says. And for all I know, he says Putin. I've never heard him say his own name. He might be watching all this stuff going, that Phil fella is the only person who gets my name right. As well as a couple of other people on the news, because I've definitely heard correspondents say Putin. For all I know, Putin is what Americans say, like they say Moscow. Now, it might be Moscow. I say Moscow because I'm from Britain, but that's just the way it is. But anyway, never mind. Fortunately, I don't have to say his name very often. Tory record, worst broadband in Europe, worst energy situation, worst railways, worst housing and health, worst public services, worst water quality. Have I forgotten anything? Yeah, you've forgotten the right list, but it doesn't matter because all of these, I mean, it's... See, I remember back when Labour first won power, and one of their sort of pledges was to bring up our healthcare spending to the EU average. Now, they did much more than that in the end, of course. But think about that. The UK, one of the richest countries in the world, one of the 3 largest economies in the EU, and yet all Blair could do was promise to bring our funding up to the average for the entire EU, including all the small countries that had only just joined with much smaller economies. I mean, not all of them are small countries. Poland's not a small country, but at the time it had a small economy. Imagine that. That's how bad. That is how bad the NHS was left in after, what was it, 18? I'm trying to remember how many years we had the Tories in. 18 years of Thatcher and Major. That's where the NHS was. That it was considered a grand boast to be able to bring it up to the funding level of average EU. But anyway. Is that LBC video I scheduled the Scouser one? Yes, it is. I did it ages ago. It's just that things kept happening. I mean, the schedule's been... It sometimes goes awry. You know, something happens every week. But this week, it's been absolutely insane. Insane. I had to do so many videos. And that news that broke last night, if that had broken tonight, I would not have been happy. And if it had broken tomorrow night, I'd have been absolutely pissed off. Because I couldn't have done anything about it then. Anyway, right, let's have a look. There isn't a pew sound in Russian. Oh, yeah, I don't speak Russian, you see. On Sunday brunch, that's up to Max and Alex then. I don't mind. The EU army should be fast-tracked. Well, I mean, whatever. I don't understand why individual European countries, because the EU doesn't have, you know, the EU essentially is about trade and politics. You know, they can have a military dimension to it. Why not? But there doesn't need to be. But anyway, it is what it is. We're stuck, utterly dependent on the Americans, even though they occasionally, and we've now got absolute... See, they used to put in people who would be a little bit insane, but generally speaking, didn't do Europe any harm. Now we get the ones who can do Europe some harm, potentially getting in charge. I mean, imagine what happens if Trump wins the next election. In fact, SVX saying Trump remaining president's my greatest nightmare. I mean, I just shudder to think what would have happened. I shudder to think. In next Saturday's video, you asked about the ferry rationing. Oh, right, that. Can Tories really defend buses of tourists being locked on their little island? The portcullis from my logo right there. Well, that's what ferry companies want to do, you see. Or they say want to do, they're thinking it. See, in brief, what's happening is these delays at Dover, they're going to keep happening. Every time there's a load of people want to go on holiday, it's going to keep happening. And the ferry company, it's not just that they're the Port of Dover getting it in the neck. The ferry companies themselves, they make money by ferrying people. If they've got to wait because there's a coach load of people with 60 passports to check and stamp, they're not ferrying as much because they're stuck waiting for the passport checks. So that's no good for their bottom line. They just want to ferry lorries, really. That's where it's at. They want to ferry lorries because that's easy. One passport. They know what they're doing. They do it all the time. One passport, done. So what their suggestion is, right, if you don't want these delays, and we don't want these delays, why don't we ration the number of coaches we allow on? Which means, by definition, rationing the number of, having a quota. That it means we have a quota on the number of coaches that we allow through our own port. And this isn't imposed by the EU, this would be us imposing it. A quota on holidays, or holidays to France at any rate. Or through France. You could drive through France and go somewhere else, I suppose. Do I have an opinion on the latest issue with the ex-Tory whip and allegations of Islamophobia? This seems to have been rife within Tories for years. It is rife. It will carry on being rife. I mean, racism, as I say, you know, just like with any of the other issues, it's not, the Tories don't have a monopoly on it. But it often seems to be worse in the Conservative Party because nobody in the party ever wants to face up to it. You can get these issues being swept under the carpet in any party because it's like, oh, if it comes out, it makes us look bad, we've got elections to worry about. You can sort of see the thinking, you know, the greater good thinking, which always steers people wrong. But with the Conservative Party, they're quite happy to just say, doesn't even exist, problem doesn't exist. And so the problem ends up being worse. Whereas in other parties, no one would ever come out and say this problem doesn't exist. But Sunak is this boast of integrity is bollocks. He will try and get off. He will try and cover for anyone he thinks he can get away with. The reason why he didn't stand firm with Gavin Williamson or Nadim Zahawi is because he couldn't get away with it. But no, Suella Braverman, she's still there. In fact, he appointed her when he never should have appointed her. So that's someone he can get away with it with. Dominic Raab, he won't get away with trying to defend Dominic Raab, so Dominic Raab will be gone. But the people where he can cover for them and it's not going to cost them in the polls, he will cover for them. Guaranteed. Could Labour create a way back into the EU by becoming close to our Scandinavian cousins, just one route that could show deepening ties with the continent? They will absolutely, I mean, the way I look at it is from two directions. First of all, they are perfectly open that they want a much closer relationship with the EU. I know they say no single market, no customs union, no EU, but they're, unlike the Conservatives, they say they want the closest possible relationship. Whereas the Conservatives are all like, we want to keep you a bit arm's length. Labour are not about the arm's length. The other thing is Labour are going to have to, by necessity, Labour have to reverse Brexit. I don't know how quickly they can do it, but they have to. It's in their own interest because our economy cannot survive. And yet, Labour cannot survive in government unless they are showing they are growing the economy. Now, there are some early wins they can get to tide them over for the first parliament, but they have to keep boosting the economy. And Brexit is a massive brick wall. And there's immediate problems as well. I mean, so... have I done this video yet? I did it. It just came out today. I don't know where I am with my schedule. So the new standards controls that the government are now going to start phasing in this October, so they say. So as I mentioned in that video, they come in 3 phases. So there's one phase coming this October. That may cause some problems, but that is relatively benign. Then there's another phase coming in January. Now that'll cause more problems, but it's in January. Trade's not that high in January, right? Then the full lot is supposed to come online next October. But the Conservatives are not in power next October. Labour are. So Labour are going to come, if they come to power next May, they are going to have a ticking time bomb waiting for them in the form of full standards declarations for all imports or food related, you know, sanitary and phytosanitary checks coming from the EU. We don't have the facilities to do that. So there's an early challenge for Labour. On the one hand, they can't just delay it because the Tories will rip them a new arsehole. Because the Tory media have been covering for the Conservatives, they won't cover for Labour. They'll say, oh, you know, the Tories had put all this in place and then you've wrecked it. You're putting our country at jeopardy from African swine fever and all the rest of it. And woe betide Labour if actually something like that happens. So Labour have to immediately start dealing with the practical aspects of Brexit. It's an electoral necessity for them. There's no choice about it. People behave as if Labour have suddenly chosen to become a Brexit party. You know, not only is it not true, it can't be true. They can't get away with it in the way the Conservatives can. Labour have no chance of getting away with it. So let's have a look. Hang on, I may flit about a bit here. One caught my eye somewhere. Now I've lost it again. If the Tories are now softening their position on Brexit, might Labour be going to the only ones campaign on Make Brexit Work? No chance. They're not softening their position on Brexit. They've turned to face the EU as opposed to waste. But how have they softened it? Give you an example. The Dover delays that hit last weekend, right? Dover delays. Every single member of the Labour front bench that talked about it said, of course it's Brexit. They put, as I said in the video I did, they put the focus on Tory incompetence, but they all said, of course it's Brexit. And you had some Labour backbenchers being really explicit about how it was Brexit, like Hilary Blenn. Stella Creasy is a Labour MP. She is very active in the Rejoin community. She's in the Rejoin the European movement. So, whereas you look at the Conservatives, right? There's more Conservative MPs. Braverman starts saying it's nothing to do with Brexit. Rishi Sunak a day or two later finally has to concede, well, it's sort of a little bit Brexit. But in terms of Tory MPs, what were they saying? The only one who said, yeah, of course it's Brexit, it's bloody obvious it's Brexit, Tobias Ellwood, a backbencher. The same backbencher who said we should rejoin the single market. But whenever he says it, he doesn't get a chorus of Tory MPs going, yeah, there's some thought in this. It's tumbleweeds. The Conservatives have got one backbench MP who suggests any sort of Brexit reversal, partial reversal, and yet Labour have got loads of them, and even their front bench, even though they are, you know, no single market, no customs union, no join the EU, which they can't anyway. But even though they say that as if it's for the long term, they still, and yes, they don't keep pointing out the damage that Brexit's doing. Fine, that's because they don't want the conversation to be about Brexit. But they don't try and pretend that things aren't Brexit when they are. They just try and shift the focus onto the Tories rather than Brexit because it's the Tories they're taking on the election. You know, that is just electoral strategy. If some big political event happens in the next few days, we might get an upload from my car with giraffes and gorillas in the background. No, we won't. We really won't. I'm not doing. I'm taking my phone. I'm probably not even going to take my computer. Apart from anything else, the hotel Wi-Fi is probably shite. I might take my computer, but I won't be doing any uploads. The next upload will be Monday. Well, obviously there'll be uploads. There'll be published videos, but I won't be physically uploading, making another video now till Monday. Right, do I get everything else? In terms of reversing some of the Brexit damage, Labour could or should start with low-hanging fruit, example, bringing back Erasmus. See, things like that I fully expect. Basically, I expect Labour to do everything short of rejoin the single market customs union or stroke EU. I think anything else is a no-brainer. We know, for example, they've talked about... See, how they proceed with the CPTPP will be interesting. I don't know what their plan will be for dealing with that. For example, Keir Starmer had said that he wants to align all our standards with the EU. That's a bit difficult with the CPTPP. So there are things that Labour have to deal with, but they will have to deal with them. It's not a choice. I'm not saying that because, as I've tried to argue in the past, the people in charge of Labour now will clearly Remainers. You know, how can you have paid attention to what happened since 2016 and not realise that Starmer, Lammy and co are Remainers, like really committed Remainers? So of course we know that they know Brexit is really damaging despite what they say. You know, and they say what they say because they need to win over some Brexity types who are their target voters. That's just unfortunate. But they also have to deal with... The Tories get away without putting practical solutions in place because the media cover for them. And even then, they don't get away with it forever. Like, they're coming to the end of the road now. Because, I mean, the stop the boats thing, they're not going to stop the boats, are they? Are they? Because the only way to stop the boats is to have legal routes. They're not going to have the legal routes, so they're not going to stop the boats. It's really that simple. You know, the best Sunak will be hoping for is that the numbers go down. And the numbers might naturally go down. We may have had a glut since COVID, and then maybe they'll just naturally decline but still remain really high. You know, whereas Labour cannot get away with bullshit because the media will call it out. Every single time. They'll call it out. Should negotiate a bespoke customs union with the EU. Well, this is the thing. See, this is what I thought. And obviously for various reasons, which I don't know, but I can speculate. I can see how there can be. But Labour have ruled it out. Now, but I would have thought that was the easiest because you could negotiate a bespoke British customs union with the EU that works in exactly the same way as the full comprehensive customs union we used to have. But CPTPP makes that impossible without leaving it first. And it would... Labour, would they leave the CPTPP in the first Parliament? It wouldn't be the first thing they would seek to do. They could justify it on the basis that it does not actually worth anything. But I'm not sure it's going to be the first thing they want to do. Anyway. What's it? HMG looking to negotiate on the Horizon project, but whinging over how much they would have to pay because they weren't in from the start of the new round. Yeah, I saw that. I mean, I really don't care how they spin it. They're obviously going to look to... What they want is they don't just... What's clear is they don't just want to rejoin Horizon. They want to make it sound like we got a good deal. That's all. And it's like... That's better because remember the first thing that happened when Rishi Sunak was asked about it after the Windsor Framework announcement was, well, should we even be in Horizon? I just thought, oh, bloody hell, man. Bloody hell. So if they are now deciding we should join Horizon, just spin it how you like. I don't care. You know, I don't care. Spin it, you know, get it in the papers. Oh, we got this great deal. We got this big discount. Fine. I'm not bothered. Just get us in it, for Christ's sake. Because the longer we stay out, the more projects we're missing out on. Could the standards alignment with the EU at the expense of CPTPP membership actually amount to a net gain in pounds? Well, the net gain in pounds from joining the CPTPP, if you go with the optimistic figures from the government, is £1.8 billion after 10 years. So if aligning standards with the EU allows any reduction at all in trade friction, obviously it's still going to mean customs paperwork, it's still going to mean standards, health certificates, things like that. Well, actually, the health certificates will be the target of it. That'll be the main target. Now, if we can avoid that for some things at least, that will be worth it. Because the thing about the 1.8 billion over 10 years as well is that might be the overall boost to the economy, but it also comes at cost. It comes at cost to our agriculture, and it comes at cost to our already beleaguered car production. Well, I say that as if agriculture is not also beleaguered, but two of the industries already hit by Brexit hard. Although I know some people don't have sympathy because they're also associated with voting Tory in 2019. But farming and car production are not exactly helped by CPTPP membership. You know, people are now worrying about all the cruelty eggs coming from Mexico. Am I going to reveal the foreign country I'm visiting for Easter? Well, the south of England's not exactly, I mean, it seems foreign because they keep pronouncing things. I mean, you go on about my pronunciation of people, they can't even pronounce basic words right. But I am just visiting the south of England, in actual fact. So it should be fine. I'll try and speak slowly for the natives. Thoughts on the EU rolling back on their plans to ban petrol and diesel cars? I mean, at the end of the day, what you need is the infrastructure in place. If it's been scaled back by a few years for whatever purpose, 2030 is an arbitrary date anyway. It will inevitably mean we do the same. My only worry is if it's been done, are they going to delay rolling out the infrastructure for it? Because if they at least keep rolling out the infrastructure, then people can still choose to go hybrid or electric. I mean, I still intend to get hybrid for my next car. There's no point in getting electric. We don't have, like, for example, the holiday I'm going on tomorrow, couldn't do that in an electric car. But you could do it in a hybrid. So I'm likely to get a hybrid next. But that is, I mean, I've not had this car for very long. But it was always assumed when I got this one, it would probably be my last petrol car. But that's all I would say on that. As long as they're still going ahead with the infrastructure, if it's been caused by a few political issues or issues of, like, because, you know, cost. Obviously, there's a lot of people trying to claim that it's going to end up costing people a lot of money for people who can't afford, like, expensive cars and stuff. And electric cars are bloody expensive. Even hybrid cars are bloody. I mean, all cars are much more expensive than they were since COVID. But, you know. So if it's like a few years delayed, but they're still going ahead with the infrastructure, all right, maybe. I don't know enough to say otherwise. No tariff on damaging palm oil from Malaysia. No, indeed. I know. How much of an impact that has realistically, I don't know. You know, how much extra would we be importing? And how much of an impact would it have? I don't know. But importing something like that, which we don't need. I know some people might like Nutella, but we don't need it. You know, it is crushingly disappointing that, again, it's one of the lies of Brexit. You know, that we would leave the EU, and Boris Johnson was saying, oh, it actually means we can raise our standards. And it's like, obvious lie. The EU never capped our standards. It provided a minimum, not a maximum. We knew that we were going to lower our standards. And it's the fact that it was a lie. I keep saying this about Conservatives. I would tolerate them in government if they were at least honest in their pitch to people. Like, and that's all I expect them to be honest in. I don't expect politicians to be properly honest of any party, because people fall for lies. Honest, you know, so you have to give politicians a certain pass. You know, if people wanted politicians to be honest, they would stop voting for lies. but at least mean it when you present your policies. You can there's certain lies I just think that's politics, that's unfortunately part of the game. But when you state your policies, mean them. And the Conservatives don't. They say they're going to raise standards, they lower them. They say they're going to fund the NHS, they don't. They say they're going to protect education, boost education, they don't. They do the opposite. And you know they're going to do the opposite. And that's what I really hate. You know, our standards morally, environmentally and health-wise are going down the toilet. And they always were going to. But people were promised that they would go up. Also reports of electric vehicles catching fire. Yeah, cells catching fire is probably a problem. But anyway, right, we'll come to them. Let's go. I've got to go and fill up my car now as well. Do you know what? This is my inexperience of going away, because I haven't been away for like 8 years. And this is my inexperience. So I was thinking to myself, planning out the journey tomorrow, and I was saying to my partner, oh, we'll set off at 10 o'clock. I'll fill up on the way, you know. And I'm just thinking about it today, and I thought, is there a lot of traffic on the roads on Good Friday? I have a feeling there's probably going to be a lot of traffic on the roads. So I may find that the petrol station is absolutely rammed when I try and fill up if I had to go in the morning, and that the journey is going to take longer than I'm thinking, because I've only suddenly thought to myself, oh, I've done the tyres recently, don't you worry. I've only just suddenly thought to myself, is there a lot of traffic on bank holiday weekends? I sort of feel there is, but because I hardly ever go out, it's like it's a hypothetical situation going out on a bank holiday weekend. I've never been mad enough to do it before. So yes, I'm going to now go and get fuel while it's quiet. But anyway, we'll call it there. Thank you very much. We will be back on again a week on Saturday with this one, because I'm not going out the house again for a good long while. But thanks very much for coming on. Have a good evening. Have a good bank holiday weekend, and until next time, I'll see you later.